In this video, I'm just going to go over the elements of the demo scene, give a quick explanation of what they are and how you can use them. The first thing we have in here is the player. This is actually a reference to the player prefab, just used for modifying the player. So you can delete this whenever you're ready, but if you want to take a look at how the player is set up and maybe make some changes, you can just use this copy of it. Or again, you could delete it and maybe pull out a copy of it whenever you're ready to make a change. And then under the player, we have a couple of settings. We have a left hand reference that needs to be set up, a right hand reference, and a head. This is just so that the player's local character can track to the online remote character. We have a network weapon script. We can take a quick look at this. This is responsible for shooting the projectile. So when we pull our gun, it's going to call this launch projectile, which calls the command, which then tells the weapon projectile launcher script to actually launch it on the server. Weapon projectile script over here. Again, it just launches the projectile. We'll dive into the script stuff in a separate video though. Let's just jump back over to the editor again. Another important thing to take a look at is player teleport. So this is a setting on the player that adjusts how far they can teleport and how often or how fast that little green circle for their teleport range grows. So there's a max distance and then a teleport recharge per second. You just adjust these values to control how quickly they can teleport around. The next setting down here is the player team. So this is just where you define the materials for each of the different teams. So if you want to have, team 1 right now is set to blue, 2 is red, 3 is yellow, and 4 is green. If you have your own characters and you want to totally change these around, you can easily do that here. If you want to swap out the model, it'll be a little bit more work. You'll have to change out the player prefab a little bit and add in some mesh options here, but I think you can take a look at the player team setup and how it does the material swapping and then just do a mesh swap instead. The next thing that's important to look at is the local player. So this is like your local player's camera rig. It's going to be where the player's head and hands are tracked, and then these get sent over or tracked by the player's other game object. So this local player here is actually going to track, this network player is going to track the local player to match up with the hands, which are right here, and then the head transform right here. If we expand this out, you'll see all we have is underneath Steam VR objects, we have a hand 1 and a hand 2. This is just your left and right hand. Now, the controllers that show up in game are set up with the controller prefab right here. Right here, under hand 1, you can see hand 1 is spawning a blank controller. That's why the right controller, or the right hand has a controller under it and the left hand doesn't. This also, having it empty, does cause an error in the error log. I think I'll make an adjustment to that, but it is in the Steam VR hand script, so I don't want to just change out their code. I'd rather find another way around this. So expect that sometime soon, but if you want the controller to show up in both hands, again, you can just select the controller prefab here, and then you choose blank controller, just like that. Now it'll show in both hands. I just didn't like that because it also shows with the gun. Okay, let's go on to the next thing. The environment section is just, let's make this bigger. It's all of the world. So right now we just have this nice little shape where each team is split off into a separate section with some barriers. And this is how I set up a lot of projects where the environment has a root and then everything that's world or environment related is underneath there. The spawn points for pre-game right here, these are what the UNet system uses to determine where the player is going to spawn. They need to have a network start position on them, and that's pretty much it. So you can pick where you want your players to start. This is where they'll be in kind of lobby mode when they first get into the game before the game is actually started. Now the more game-specific stuff is all under controllers. So this is going to be the most important part to take a look at. Respawn points controller has all of the points where a teammate or team member can respawn in the game. So we have the blue team is team 1, so they're all going to spawn over here somewhere at one of these blue points. Team 2 will spawn on the opposite side right over here. In fact, I should probably switch these to be red on the tags just to make it a little bit easier to tell what's going on. Right, these guys, we turn them all red. And then Team 3 and 4, of course, are in the other two sides. Oh, let's get Team 2. Change that all to red. So yeah, then we have Team 3 and Team 4 over there. Oh, and it's important to also take a look at the player start point. This is what specifies which team number it's for. And again, we could have any number of teams. I think right now we're capped by default at 8 or 10. And then we have the simple audio controller. This is just a component meant for playing our voiceovers and other sound effects. So if we take a look here, there are 5 audio sources on here. And the way this works is it'll just get a request to play a sound, and it will put the audio source wherever it needs to play the sound and then play that sound effect. If you prefer to do it a different way, that's totally fine. This is just one of the ways I like to set up audio events. So take a look at it. If you like it, use it. If you don't, then you definitely don't have to. Each one of these elements down here actually refers to a voiceover event in the audio events voiceovers folder, or this event right here, the paintball gunshot, which is not in voiceovers. And if you select one of them, you can hit the preview button.
Get back to your bases.
Hear what they sound like, get a good idea of what they are. And the important part up here is the audio event ID. So the code that's calling these just tells the simple audio controller to play an ID and add a position, and then it'll play that sound effect there. All right, the team controller determines how many teams there are. By default, it's set to 1, and this is just to make it easy to debug and test as a solo player. You probably want this to be 2 or 4, whatever your team count is going to be. And now, if you want to make this adjustable, you can add a UI element to the menu and then make it so that this isn't only controlled in the editor. The game state controller is responsible for handling game state. So this handles the flow between a variety of different default game states and any other game states that you decide to create. So if you go under game state here, you'll see it's just an abstract class, and there are a variety of implementations. Each game state has a method for when it enters the state, when it exits the state, and then this tick method, which is essentially an update for these non-mono behavior objects. And now if you look down here at the references, you'll see we have a waiting for host, a waiting for players, a playing state, a pregame countdown state. So these are the default states. Again, you could add in your own. You could have a post-game state where it shows a score. You could have some other different types of states, whatever makes sense for your game. I assume it's going to vary quite a bit. And some of these states don't even do anything, right? Waiting for host is a relatively empty state. There's nothing that really happens here. Waiting for player state just checks in the tick to see if there are enough players, and if there are, it sets us to a new state. Playing state, again, doesn't really have anything that it needs to do because we just wait for the players to play. And then the countdown state just handles assigning teams. So this is kind of like a pre-warming state. This is where we pick each player's team, we play some countdown audio, we start a timer, a visual timer, and then when the timer ends, we start the game. We also play some audio here when we play the countdown audio. Alright, let's jump back here. The decal controller is responsible for showing decals in game. So these are the paintball splats. If you want to adjust the paintball splats or replace them, there's a decal prefab right here, the paintball splat, which has all of the materials and the colors. The way it works now is a material is randomly selected along with a randomly selected color. The Paintball Network Manager handles the work of sending the messages back and forth. We'll dive into that in one of the script videos in the future. The game settings, this is the very important one. This is where you set the minimum number of players to start. So if we want our game to not start until there are 2 players, we need to turn this up to 2. Now if you want to have it so that the players sit in a lobby and then the game starts after another player selects go or start or something like that, you'll need to change the way that the waiting for players part works. So if we look here, let's take a quick look at how this works. And then again, we'll show some more in the scripting section later. But the way it's working is in the game state waiting for players, all we do is wait for the number of players to match or be greater than this minimum number of players. Then we start the game. So if you want to change that behavior, you would just change it here. And then the teleport section right here is just using the Steam VR teleport system. So if you want to make an adjustment to the teleport system, it's very standard. It's just the one that's built in with Steam VR. You can go in and make a change here. Other than that, we have the UI, which has this, let's see, a network manager UI, which has some stack panels, and then we have a header, and then under the body we have the section for internet buttons, the section for the game list, and there's also a LAN section that's disabled. You can turn that on if you want to allow LAN games to be created. There isn't currently a way to enter text in the VR mode though, so that you could select a LAN IP address. So you'd have to implement that or use the keyboard to add that. And then this last thing down here is just a countdown timer that just shows the timer when we enter the countdown mode. So these are kind of the basics of the demo scene. Watch the other videos to get more info about the system, learn how to set up your own scene, and understand how the scripts work.